And I'm presenting the VTC Group Innovation Director at Gaskell to give his speech how artificial intelligence and automation is impacting the future of work.
Okay, thank you. It seems like a common theme of the sessions today was perseverance, passion, and really loving what you do. So I commend everyone that stayed around. It's been quite a long day, so I salute you for your perseverance. I feel duty-bound as the last speaker today to send you off home to your friends, your loved ones, your cat, your dog, in a good spirit. And with a lot of the talk about digital innovation, AI, it's very, very pessimistic. People are very gloomy about the number of jobs that are going to be lost, that our livelihoods will be destroyed, and I'd like to present a slightly more nuanced picture. So the table behind me was constructed by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they were basically compiling a lot of the studies that have been done into the impact of automation on our workplaces. And you can see from the studies, they vary from the reasonably dire to the pretty tragic and catastrophic, with one suggestion there of a couple of trillion jobs being lost. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on the individual studies, but you can see from the data up there that there's a huge amount of variance. So I think that says that we don't really have a great idea of what's going to happen, which is perhaps intuitive. But the media love to feed on the system one kind of emotions that Rob was talking about earlier. They like to feed on our fear, our anger, our things that things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And bad news is what the media sort of works with. They know that bad news is what gets us clicking onto the websites. It's what gets us buying the newspapers, viewing the TV broadcasts. And so that's what they produce. That's what the consultancies and the academics and all of the people that are feeding the media their stories produce in terms of research, and it becomes a vicious circle of ever-increasing gloom. And a lot of these stories build on sort of popular culture from Terminator, The Matrix, where machines are enslaving mankind and making it pretty terrible. But I think personally, a better cultural reference comes from a 1950s British comedy called The Man in the White Suit. We've got a very young audience, so I don't expect any of you have actually seen this, but it stars Alec Guinness, who was the original Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's an inventor, and he develops a fabric that is pretty cool, to, again, borrow Rob's System 1 thinking. It doesn't get dirty, it doesn't break, it doesn't tear, it's practically indestructible. So he thinks this is going to revolutionize society and have huge benefits for mankind. But of course, all of the producers that rely on us buying new items of clothing all the time, all of the people whose business is mending our clothes, cleaning our clothes, they're terrified of this new invention because it will put them out of work. And so they lobby the parliament to try and get it banned. When that doesn't work, they take to destroying his laboratory to try and halt the work that way. And in the end, this is a comedy, so they end up chasing him through the streets, trying to get him to stop doing his entrepreneurial work. And as they're chasing him through the streets, and remember this is a comedy, so it's not to be taken too literally, his suit literally starts falling off of him. And so by the end, after a few minutes of running around the streets, he's walking around in his underwear, and it's incredibly funny. But it's also quite illustrative of technology and our reaction to it. Because we've kind of been here before. We've been here with the Luddites, and every industrial revolution since then, we've had a massive overhyping of technology and what it can achieve. And we've had people with vested interests getting very afraid of what impact it might have on them and their livelihoods. So we're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, or the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. So as the name suggests, we've had 3 industrial revolutions before that. And they've each followed a similar pattern. They've each had similar concerns about the impact that technology will have on our lives. And there have been people with a quite dystopian view of the future. Now, the lady behind me is called a knocker-upper. And in Victorian London in the 1800s, you might use this lady to wake you up in the morning. She was an original alarm clock, if you like. So you'd hire her, she'd come outside your window when you're presenting at one of the earlier editions of this conference, perhaps, and she'd stand there with her, it's like a pea shooter device, and fire a small rock at your bedroom window, hopefully not breaking it, but giving it a rattle to wake you up. Now, other knocker-uppers would have a very long stick that would do the same kind of thing, and they'd stand under and just sort of knock your window. Now, suffice to say, none of us actually use a knocker-upper now. We use our mobile phones, we have alarm clocks, we use televisions and all manner of other devices, and the work of the knocker-upper has been automated. And yet not only do we not miss the work of this good lady, we're not unemployed, society has evolved, and we've adapted to the changes of technology. Now, people argue that this time it's different, that the technology we're talking about today is fundamentally different to those in the past. Now, the evidence to date doesn't suggest that's actually true. There's a groundbreaking study by the London School of Economics that was looking at the impact of technology on 18 economies around the world over the last 20 years. And they looked at multiple industries in each of those economies to see what impact technology had on employment levels. And they found it was actually very little. And not only was it very little across the economy, it was actually very little even in sectors where the skill level was relatively rudimentary, i.e. in jobs where you could actually automate it quite easily. And not only was that the case, it was also the case that there wasn't much disruption to employment in areas with low skills that were also correlating with investment in technology. So the argument is that today it's going to be just around the corner. It's always just around the corner, the disruption that we're facing. It's so vast, so rapid that we can't adapt. And I'd like to address those 2 points as well, because I'm not sure they really hold water. So if we take the speed of disruption, and it takes very Schumpeterian qualities, the tornado of change and so on. Now, the driverless car is perhaps the embodiment of autonomous technology today. And this is one of the early entrants in the DARPA driverless car challenge, which began in 2005. Now, participants were asked to navigate a fairly simple track out in the desert autonomously. Now, every single one of the early entrants failed. Quite a few of them caught fire, and they were generally pretty hopeless. Now, by the following year, a number had actually completed the course. And so you might regard that as quite a good example of the speed of technology. But it wasn't until another 3 years that one of the winners from the Stanford team, Sebastian Thrun, joined Google, and they started their own driverless car project. That was another 6 years after 2009, 2015, when Waymo, as the project subsequently became known, started doing work on public roads. Now, only last week we had the incident with Uber. We've had incidents with Tesla previously, and the industry as a whole widely predict that driverless cars will be a common sight on our roads around 2025. So we're still back from 2025 to that initial challenge. We're looking at 21 years, which is roughly half of the working life of the average person today. So it's not a particularly rapid pace of change, and certainly not something that we can't adapt to. Now, there was an interesting study by the Stockholm Business School published earlier this year that was looking at the dissemination of a whole bunch of innovative technologies, and they were looking at the factors that were prevalent in that dissemination. And they found that technology actually played a very small part. A much bigger part was played by legal concerns, ethical concerns, social concerns, these very human issues that we need to overcome for any technology to cross that chasm and reach the mainstream. And I think certainly with AI and those kind of technologies, we're at a very early stage of that. Now, people also say that AI is very powerful. And indeed, there has been some tremendous early work done on AI. But I think we're at quite a grave risk of overinflating the possibilities. So even with those early results, there are a number of technical issues that AI still has to overcome before it can be a real practical use in the workplace. So one of those is data. Most of the progress that's been done on AI today has been on two pillars. We've had huge amounts of data, whether it's big data or just data, and we've got ever more powerful computers to actually process that data. But whilst Facebook has 2 billion records and various dubious ways of getting data out of us, most organizations, their data sucks. It's in silos, it's poorly formatted, it's incorrectly labeled. All of the things that machine learning needs from data, most of our organizations have none of it. So that's a massive hurdle to be overcome if AI is to really fulfill its promise. Another challenge is around the explainability. Now, AI is becoming increasingly powerful in some quite interesting ways, whether it's diagnosing illness or predicting recidivism rates in the criminal justice system. Now, these are the kind of decisions that they're quite serious. I think society wants to know how an AI came to its verdicts. I don't think we can just accept that it's a black box, that we don't know how it works, it can't explain itself. I think we demand better. Now, there have been some quite interesting research studies looking at how AI can explain its workings, and whilst they are interesting, they are at a very, very early stage, and so we're still quite a long way off from having that explainability element that I think mankind needs. There are also ethical issues, and whether the various biases that inflict us as human beings and the decisions that we make are being hard-coded into the machines. A quite nice example came from a recent study from MIT and Stanford, and it was looking at the 3 market leaders of facial recognition technology. And it found that whilst they were all fantastic at detecting the faces of white men, they were terrible at detecting the faces of ethnic minority women. And when they analyzed why this was so, they analyzed the data that fueled the systems and trained the algorithms, and they found that 75% of those faces that were used in the data set were actually white men. So it's perhaps not surprising that these systems are terrible at detecting anything other than white men when they've only been trained to detect white men. And so various issues are holding back AI at the moment, and they're not insurmountable issues, but they're not small either. Now, the various studies that have been conducted into the impact of AI also have another number of logical fallacies that make their conclusions a little bit less than watertight. So perhaps the most famous study was conducted by Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne for Oxford University. And it had a whole bunch of media coverage and so on, and it scared the living daylights out of a lot of people, I think. Now, they made the fallacy that if you can automate one task in our daily life, then you can automate the whole job, which, of course, is nonsense. All of our jobs are very complex. We have hundreds of different tasks that make up our daily life, and they're nothing if not complex. So the idea that you can automate everything that we do based upon the automation of one task is rather silly. And I think a slightly more nuanced analysis was provided by McKinsey, who found that whilst you can automate some of the tasks and about 50% of jobs, you can only automate 5% of jobs in their entirety. And I think that provides a slightly more nuanced perspective on things. And even with the AI that has been developed, they're all pretty much better when they're working alongside a human being than when they're replacing a human being. So whether that's in medicine or chess or whatever, giving us the power of the machine is always better than the machine working on its own or the human working on its own. So another fallacy that is quite commonplace is what economists call the lump of labor fallacy, that we've got this one pile of jobs, and then once you take a job out that's automated, then it's gone forever. And a lot of studies happily predict the number of jobs we'll lose because that's terrifying. They're much worse at predicting the number of jobs that will be created. And throughout history, technology has always created a lot more jobs than it's destroyed. And we're living on a planet with about 3 billion extra people over the last 100 years, and yet unemployment hasn't gone up. We're not living in destitution. We're all gainfully employed. Unemployment is at historic lows in much of the world. And so this idea that new jobs won't be created is a little bit naive, I think. And even in technologies like autonomous vehicles, I've put the Uber driverless truck behind me, and even they don't think their technology is going to lead to huge amounts of unemployment, but it will lead to changes in employment. So rather than driving the entire route, they predict you'll have depots on the outskirts of cities that will be automated, and then that last mile within the city will be driven by a human being. Other driverless car companies recommend that you will have people monitoring the transit of every vehicle. So if there are difficulties, if they need to call an emergency service, the passenger has an issue, there's somebody actually in a depot monitoring that progress that they can have a conversation with. So I think the idea that new jobs won't be created is a little bit naive. Now, Cognizant, the consultancy company, had a go at estimating some of these new jobs that will be created. They identified around 21 new roles. And while some of them sound distinctly science fiction, they found that there were 3 underlying characteristics that infused each of those roles. And I think they've come out through much of the discussions that we've had today, and they're very human characteristics. So the first one was coaching, and the ability to get the best out of other people, whether they are man or machine. Caring was the second characteristic. And I think whilst there has been progress in AI in healthcare, I think the days of us being cared for by a machine or not a human being are a long way off. And the third thing is connecting. And again, it's a characteristic that's come up a lot today, the ability to collaborate well with others, whether it is man or machine, whether it's different types of software. The ability to connect up different worlds is increasingly important. And to an extent, that's the opportunity that we face today. Because at the moment, a lot of the AI technologies have been parachuted into legacy processes. It's akin to trying to drive a car in the same way that you drive a horse. It's nonsense. And yet that's kind of what we're doing with AI today. And it's something that Michael Brynjolfsson has picked up on, because these new technologies aren't coming through into the productivity stats. All of the investments, all of the progress that we've made aren't making us more productive. And he likens AI to electricity in that it's a general purpose technology, and we won't get the best out of it until we start developing new ways of working, new business processes, new business models that have AI at their very core. And until we have that, I don't think we'll be seeing the best of AI as a technology. And Accenture predict that if you can actually create that fusion, then you can increase profits by about 35%. So there's a real opportunity there if you can crack the nut. But of course, there is a skills gap at the moment. And that same Accenture study found that whilst 50% of organizations have identified a clear gap in the skills that they need their employees to have and the skills that they actually have in terms of working with technology, just 3% of them are actually investing to bridge that gap. And so there's a tremendous opportunity, I think, for us to get better, to take a more strategic role in the training and development of our people. But with things like the gig economy, there's also a concern amongst society that people are being left to their own devices. Their training needs are largely left on their own plate. And so society have been taking a real interest, policymakers have been taking a real interest in how we can educate people more effectively. So the UK Government Office for Science recently published a paper looking at adult education in the UK. And it wasn't particularly healthy reading. Not only did they find that engagement with adult education throughout society was going down, it was going down particularly fast amongst those who need it the most, those with poor skills, those in disadvantaged areas, those whose jobs are most at risk from automation. They were the people that were least engaged with adult education. And when the researchers spoke to this demographic, a number of the cognitive biases that Rob sort of highlighted came up. People weren't interested in learning. They found they didn't have the time. They felt they didn't have the confidence to pursue it. Maybe they were too old. Various mental blocks were stopping them from engaging with education. And it's a similar thing with technologies like the MOOCs, the massive open online courses, where you've got universities from around the world providing bite-sized courses for free. And when they've analyzed the student body on these courses, the vast majority of them already have a degree. They're people like you and I. And we're not really the ones that need it. It's not the unemployed that use these courses. It's not those that are disadvantaged and are priced out of the traditional education system. And so we need to bridge that gap as a society. But also we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our own lives. And there's quite a nice course from Stanford University's MBA program called Design Your Life, whereby they use design thinking to help us to craft the life that we want. And they identify 5 key characteristics, principles, if you like, that we can live by to make sure that we get the life that we want. So the first one is curiosity. And it's come out quite a lot today that we need to be passionate and interested in the world, amazed by the possibilities that are out there. I think we all have that as children, but for some reason it gets beaten out of us at some point in our lives, whether it's at school or in the workplace. So we need to re-engage that inherent curiosity that we have. We need to be brave and accept that when you're experimenting, when you're doing new things, trying to innovate, you're going to get things wrong now and then. You're going to make mistakes. And accept that that's an inherent part of learning. You need to be coaching and getting support from other people. And if you can't, you have to accept that you can't do all of this on your own. And you get help from whether it's a friend, a partner, a professor, an employer, maybe a government official. You can't do this on your own, so you've got to get support from others. And my mind has gone blank. Excuse me. Yes, you need to know that it's a lifelong process. And accept that learning isn't something that you do until you're 21 and then you go into the workplace. It's something that you'll be doing indefinitely throughout your life. And so you've really got to have that love for learning. And you've also got to reframe some of the problems that stopped those adult learners in the UK from engaging in education and try and reframe some of those cognitive biases that are holding us back. So I think that it's indisputable that there is change happening. It would be naive to bury our head in the sand and pretend that technology isn't making an impact. But I think it's making an impact in such a way that we can adapt. We can change ourselves to make sure that whatever society does emerge in the future is a good one. And my grandfather's Polish, and he told me at great length, as grandfathers often do, when I was growing up, about Polish history and so on, and a particular period resonated with me, and it was called Polish positivism. And it was a period where the country was occupied by the Soviet Union, and it was not working. The military objections weren't working, the political objections weren't working, and so they instead decided to focus on education and to get the best out of each and every Polish person, whether man, woman, child, and really focus on patriotism via scientific output, via technological output, via economic output, and infuse the country with education. And that's what all of us here do. Education is our brief, so you are kind of the heroes that we need. And I think if we can engage the passion that we have in this room and the work that you do, then we will have a fantastic future alongside technology. Thank you. We have some time for questions if anyone has any. Okay. One by the lady at the back.
Thank you for the visionary speech. You mentioned the AI is actually like the light bulb when Edison worked with it, although electricity was there. So I think this is a good analogy, but is there any field AI is applied in human resources where there is results already, or where there is, concrete work in your knowledge?
I wouldn't say on a mass scale, no. There have been some interesting early examples of using AI to filter candidates or recommend courses for people to go on and that kind of thing, but it's very early level stuff. And as with most early level stuff, there are successes and failures, and I don't think we've reached a consensus yet on how AI can really be used in the HR field, but I think it's not what AI can do for HR, it's what HR can do for AI, if you like, and how we can really be training our staff to work better with the machines so that we can, it's what IBM call augmented intelligence. And I think we need to have the new skills that we can work effectively with the machines, and that's really where HR comes in.
Well, early this morning, in one of the speech, they told that customer services will be replaced by artificial intelligence. And they said that in the future there will be no call centers. The first thought I had that time that, oh, that's mean that the coaching will be also replaced. But you said now that 3C will not be replaced. I mean, it's coaching, caring, and connecting. So do you really believe that coaching could not be replaced by artificial intelligence if call centers do?
I've been on the receiving end of a number of call center sort of rabbit holes where you talk to machines and you get option 1 and then you option 2 and option 3 and you don't really get your problem solved, and it's painful. And I think if any company really cares for their customers, then that's not an experience they want to put them through. So for me, I think there's still a place for having customer service. Now, I think where potential is for automation is something like an Amazon, where you're making customer service so smooth and so frictionless that people don't really have complaints. Or even then, we could argue that people do have complaints, but they don't know where to put them. So I think it's a balance, but I don't think there'll ever be a complete replacement of human customer service people. Certainly not in a retail setting. I think that's a real opportunity for value add. Okay, super. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all a splendid evening. Thank you.